Well, a deconstructed Christian and a Christian have a dialogue. One of the gentlemen from our Facebook community, Rory, and I are going to have a conversation on today's episode where we cover his story, what led him to his deconstructing, and where he's at now after this process. Hello, doubters. Thank you for joining us. If you're on the process of deconstructing your Christian faith, you are in the right place. Today, as I mentioned, we're going to have a conversation with a firefighter from Canada. His name is Rory. He is in our Facebook group, and every once in a while, I put out a call to say, hey, does anybody want to come on the show and have a dialogue? And he was gracious enough to agree. We get to hear some of his story in this episode. Rory, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Well,
yeah, I appreciate this a lot. Thanks.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to this conversation. So I guess a good place to start would be tell us a little bit about kind of the church that you grew up in, or how you came to faith originally, and then we'll try to pick up on the rest of the story after that.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up Catholic in a really Catholic area. Like I grew up in rural Saskatchewan. We lived close to a Benedictine monk monastery, which I had some of my family involved in. Like, I guess he'd be my second cousin once removed type thing. I don't know exactly. But he is the abbot there. And then so I've got some priests in my family and nuns and stuff. And so we were very Catholic. Going to church every Sunday ever since I could, altar boy kind of thing. And did that for years and years and years, even to the point when I had sleepovers. I had to go in the morning to church, even though like my friends weren't. I had to walk there and go to church every morning.
Yep,
and it was fine. Yeah, it was fine. I actually I appreciated a lot of it, and some stuff I didn't quite understand, but whatever. And then I got into university, and I was really interested in like religious studies, philosophy, but went into psychology because ideally that was supposed to pay the bills, but that didn't end up happening. And then with that, started getting involved with, I don't know, just going to church on my own volition. Mm-hmm. Where do I see myself and what makes sense to me? And my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife. So we went we went to church. It would have been an evangelical style church.
Okay.
We don't quite have it like we do like in the States,
mm-hmm.
but I'd say it's more like that than anything. And took religious studies classes and philosophy, and it was interesting. It was part of Campus Crusade for Christ. Did a missions trip.
Okay. And
it was definitely a decent big part of my life. It was definitely always there. It wasn't sometimes more involved than others, but
okay.
Yeah. And then, I'll go back a little bit, but with the whole, growing up near the monastery with priests and whatnot was really interesting because I had a real different view of what I think other people have with Catholicism.
Mm-hmm.
It was really more of a personal thing. We'd go to a couple times a year, we'd go to mass with just the monks and the priests.
Interesting.
And seeing how they do it versus how they lead it was a real eye opener. And it kind of gave me a little bit more respect for the priesthood and all that sort of stuff. It seems sort of staunch, and traditional up there in the robes. But when you see, these guys just in their everyday clothes and they're real people, gives you a little different perspective.
Oh, totally. Yeah. I mean, just as a point of connection, I as well grew up Catholic, was baptized as a baby. The Catholic church that we went to was about 4 blocks from my house. So I can totally relate with, having a sleepover with friends in the neighborhood and waking up the next morning and kind of being the only one awake because we went to sleep late. But I'm like, I got to get up. I got to go to church, guys. And I could walk there and then meet my parents there and then go get my stuff later. So totally relate with some of that, didn't quite understand all of the in-depth theology, thought it was a lot of, just repetitive, why do I have to learn all these, the act of contrition and, all these prayers that you had to do, and just really didn't understand it, but knew that there was, for me, knew that there was kind of something deeper. And it wasn't until I was 12 that I would say that I, accepted Jesus, that I kind of had that moment, if you will, that experience, and stayed in the Catholic Church until I was 16. And then at that point, my parents were like, okay, you've been confirmed in the Catholic Church, you can go where you'd like to. And then that's where I started going to a Baptist church, but it functioned a lot more like a non-denominational church. So yes, very similar, background, kind of growing up and experiencing some of that high church thing, right off the bat. So, okay. So what do you do now professionally? You said you're not a psychologist. You went to school.
Yeah, no.
For some of that. So what do you do now professionally?
Yeah.
Just share that with the audience.
Well, I'll just add to the place that we moved to. We've been going to an Alliance church, which has been a fantastic community, like hands down amazing. And so we've been doing that for the past 14 years. And so anyways, I was going to university. My brother passed away in an accident. And then I kind of had a whole, basically took a year off, and I was going to go back to school. And my sister said, what about firefighting? I'm like, hey, I never thought about it. Seems pretty cool. I was like, always playing hockey and football, and I like athletics, and it seems to be a good trajectory for that. And so I went to fire college, then came back, finished my degree, and then just kind of looked for jobs and found one where I'm at now. And it's a fire EMS integrated service.
Okay.
So basically it's like one day on the fire truck, one day on the ambulance. And as you gain seniority, you less on the ambulance and more fire related or fire rescue related.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's cool, man. Well, I know I don't live in Canada, but I always want to, say that I'm appreciative for people that are serving in that capacity. It is probably a very thankless job, and you're putting your life on the line consistently. And so, man, props to you for having that courage and going through that process and literally saving lives every day. So I really appreciate you and the people that do what you do. So yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
So, okay. So we got some background there. So for you, take me to the kind of point that if you can remember, take me to the point where you started to kind of really ask some tough questions or significantly doubt what was going on in your life, kind of around that, or was it more of just a gradual, like, I just started asking a question here and a question there, and ended up snowballing. So how did it come about for you? Yeah,
it was about 3 years ago, I guess 3.5 years ago now. I sat down. I had a 1-year Bible and had it for a long time, and it was always like, okay, I'm going to read this. Didn't end up happening. And then I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to do it this January 2nd, and I'm going to start there. And so I started reading, and I'm like, oh, okay, interesting. And I kind of went into it going, like, I'm going to try to understand this as an adult, not from something I knew as a kid and progressed and, didn't really, not necessarily ask questions, but, look at it from a mature standpoint.
Yeah.
And, so then I started going and I made it, into Genesis, and I'm like, okay, well, I have some questions, and then started like just going to Google. Like I had no idea. A lot of this stuff, actually, none of this stuff did I know was out there. Like almost none. Like I read books, like I read C.S. Lewis, I read Paul Stanley, some Ravi at the time, Ravi Zacharias, R.C. Sproul. But I didn't know about the apologetics. I didn't know about the philosophical arguments as much. Like I heard about them and like I did read Aquinas and Augustine, but I didn't know to the extent of what the apologetics world looks like, the philosophy of religion world looks like, as someone who's like not just a student. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I'm not just writing a test to get through this course. I'm actually like engaged in the learning of it.
Right. Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah. And so then I went to Google, and I'm just like, okay, perspectives on Genesis, and then found William Lane Craig, and just kind of went from there. And so when I say I read books, I don't really read books. I listen to books. I just don't have time to read. Listening to books is fantastic. So, yeah. And so that's what I went down and got a few books, podcasts. And I joke that I listened to William Craig so much that I believe I dreamt in his voice. Like it's like all his podcasts, his debates, books, not all his books. No, only one really. The Reasonable Faith, third edition one. Yeah. And that was the first book I got on Audible. And I'm like, whoa, cool. This is a whole new world for me.
Yeah. It's thick. It's thick and long, but it's also really dense in some areas for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. I had to rewind a lot.
Yeah. No, so that's good. So, okay, so you started, kind of getting into, Craig and some of these other philosophers. So then what then, led you to, start to kind of question, were you finding answers for some of the questions you had as you were reading in Genesis, or were they, not satisfying for you, or kind of what were some of the other pieces that were going on around that?
Yeah, one big thing was, so I was amazed at all the perspectives that there were, the interpretations.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, which one is right? Because they can't all be right. And like, there has to be one thing that like either Adam existed or he didn't. Like, sure, it could have been a story, or, it could have been a myth. It could have been, how Josh Swamidass thinks that maybe it happened. It could have been like, we're talking theistic evolution here. Like, what sort of understanding do we have? And that was one of the real catalysts was, well, how am I supposed to figure this out? And so I started like looking into it, and John Walton and the original sin, and, the creation myth, and, all these things, Imago Dei, ex nihilo, like all these words I, have heard just randomly, but like, what is it all like? How do I put this together? And I think that was one of the things where I started going like, oh, there really isn't a consensus. Like there is in this, like from the Catholics' perspective, they have a theistic evolution perspective. There's a young earth perspective. Well, those do not work together. And a lot of people talk about how, the fallen world. Well, how does that work? Was Adam real? Is Adam not real? Is like, so that was kind of the real, like, oh, this is really, really dense. And then just floodgates from there.
So, okay. So take us through. So, I guess one clarifying question again, this is, just try to help me understand some of your mindset as you're working through some of this. But let's say, I mean, this is just interesting for me. So if you accept that Jesus rose from the dead and you've given your life to him, right, in a sense, and you get to the question about, the flood or Adam and Eve, how do those two things tie together for you in that? Like, as you were going through your research, what were you trying to accomplish by understanding more of the in-depth theology of Genesis as it relates to something like the resurrection?
So like, like once again, the different atonement theories. And so like Jesus' death and resurrection was to atone for our sin. And so one of the crux was, the first question I had was Adam real or not? Sure. Because if Adam's not real, well, then there really wasn't a fall as depicted. And then, like, were we born with sin, or did we have a fall? Like, does free will create because we're choosing not to follow? Like, how does this all work together? Because without Genesis, the resurrection, Jesus dying for our sins, kind of doesn't make any sense to me. It like, because that's the first part in the Bible. It's the beginning of everything. Jesus is the crux of everything, like those two, there has to be a line to those two. And there is, like in the genealogies, like obviously Jesus is from David and then all the way down, right? So they're in scripture, there's a direct line.
Yeah.
So, like there has to be some sort of connection. And it really threw me for a loop, because in Genesis, depending on how your interpretation is, well, what is that line? Because I understand that, like, the resurrection and that's the foundation of the Christian faith.
Sure.
But what is the foundation of that? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, and that's helpful. So let me try to ask it a different way. So, like, let's just say, for example, kind of just for the sake of argument, right? So to me, or maybe this is part of the story that we didn't get to. Was there a time that you felt like that you affirmed the resurrection as true in your life, and that Jesus was the Lord of your life, that was something that you had investigated at some point? Or, was there like kind of a moment, would you say, that you accepted that as true, or was it just like provisionally or culturally true for you, going forward? So I guess one of the things that is I'm trying to unpack is, like, okay, if I have good evidence for the resurrection, whether that's a personal experience or whether that's textual or historical, and I come to a question about Adam, I can take or leave the question about Adam, but Jesus still walked out of the grave would be the other question. So if Jesus walked out of the grave, if that's something that I'm affirming as a Christian, and I have a big question mark as far as Adam, right? There's theological systems that you could build, kind of models or whatever around, why Jesus had to die, or what's, Christus Victor, or the penal substitutionary atonement. There's different ways that you can look at that. But for you, like, just as your, personal walk with Jesus, how did the Adam question mark affect the empty tomb affirmation, I guess, as the way that I would ask it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So to go back to your first part, so in university, I went to retreats and whatnot. And that's when I think the first time I really took the whole, like, understood, like, accepting Jesus as my Lord and Savior, and going down that route versus, like, Catholicism, where it's just basically you go to the sacraments and you yada, 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 you're part of the club.
Right. Stand up, sit down, fight, you're in. Okay, great.
Right, exactly. Right. So then, so I did have a time when that was the case, and that was, I didn't really question it so much. Like, it made sense to me. I'm like, okay, yeah, this makes sense. I have this worldview. That worldview seems to make sense. And I was more in the Protestant side of things with the Alliance Church and whatnot, where obviously that was the personal relationship, right? And that made sense. So how do I get from affirming that the resurrection was true to having concerns about Adam?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So with that is, I kind of think it's an interesting way. This is maybe a little of an aside, but I think it's an interesting way to look at something, to go, I know something is the truth, and now I'm going to go, well, it's essentially maybe ad hoc's not the right word, but know something is true, and then I'm going to try to justify it looking back. Like, how does that work? I'm going to go, and some of that stuff's just based on, my experience, like what makes sense to me. I don't know, like, in the sense of, like, what atonement theory? Well, I don't know. Like, which one? Nobody has a real answer. They have answers, but there's not like there's more interpretations. So you can go all the way down the road from the resurrection back, and you can pick and choose which interpretation you want, which makes sense to you. But that the reason it makes sense is only because of, like, why does it make sense to me? Well, because the experiences I've had, the information that I've gotten, like, this seems more convincing than that seems convincing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So again, let me just, I'm just going to ask some clarified questions, and I'm not, I don't, this isn't an argument. This is not a debate. We don't have prepared statements or anything. I'm just trying to unpack some of, where I'm coming from and my thought process, and trying to understand your thought process. So, for the audience, if you have, questions about anything that I'm saying, or anything that, Rory's saying, please go ahead and leave them in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.
I do have to say a caveat. This is really the first time I've ever really talk to somebody about this, because as soon as I've said a few questions, a lot of people just go, and I'm like, I don't want to put this on anybody. So this is really interesting, because I'm really, I've put this stuff on paper. I've had conversations with myself on many drives, all my drives basically.
Right.
But it's the first time myself hearing it. You know what I mean?
Man, I really appreciate being the first one, right? So we're giving.
You always remember your first.
Right. We're giving a lot of grace to Rory here. It's totally fine, and I love that you're here. Yeah. You're part of our community, our Facebook community. So if you're watching this and you're on a similar path that Rory's explaining, join the Facebook group. I hope Rory can say that it's a good group, and we have good conversations, and there's great folks there. So So one of the things that I think I'm picking up on, so just clarify for me, is that the uncertainty is an issue for you, at least in the framework of Christianity. The fact that there could be more than one answer, or more than one way to address a theological question, or even a historical question, seem to start raising some doubts for you. Would you affirm that kind of thing, that the uncertainty was an issue?
Yeah, I think so. Well, yeah, I'd say, and for a few reasons, because for one, would have, okay, so this is there's different ways to know, right? There's scripture, there's self-revelation, there's, so when humans are trying to understand this, and this is a way that God has put this in the world for us to understand. And I guess, just to put it this way, the biblical confusion part is pretty big for me. That would be a really big argument against Christianity, because of how many interpretations there are, how the depth that these interpretations can go, and also I had a little moment, maybe an aha moment, as I'm spending time podcasts and books and racking things over in my head. And I said, how difficult should this be? I've spent the last 3 years doing this in my waking, to the point where my wife, who's still a Christian, said, she's like, you just need to stop. This is not healthy for you. And, so I'm like, well, how come this is so difficult? And not even in the sense of why it's not convincing, but in order for me to understand, even just say Genesis, I have to know all these theories and then choose which one I think fits, and then move to the next. And, then that doesn't even get me to atonement. What sort of atonement theory? What's my idea of hell? You have to do this with all these stages or steps, or I don't know how to put it, and I go, I'm a relatively intelligent person, and I'm really struggling with this.
Well, you definitely are intelligent. You sound intelligent. You've thought deeply about these things. So, So is it, let me ask this question. So is it just the uncertainty, you're coming to the question, thinking that there should be more certainty, or is it just uncertainty and how deep does your skepticism go in other areas, or is it just skepticism because on some level you feel like it should be more certain on that level?
Yeah, I guess to put it simply, yeah, I feel the certainty part is a factor, but yeah, like it either has to be a way or it doesn't, right? Like it can't be multiple ways. Like the Exodus couldn't have happened and not happened.
True.
It, oh, did I lose you?
Nope, I'm still here.
Okay. Oh, just wanted to update. So what is it? You know, and the uncertainty is the question I have, and I think I have this question when it comes to a lot of things when it comes to Christianity and theism is why? Why is there such depth of uncertainty?
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like why do I have to think so deeply? And other people, like, I mean, you can get PhDs in
like single words or single chapters,
right.
or
yeah.
But okay, so no, I think again, this is, I just want to keep reiterating, I'm not debating Rory here. We're just having this, you know, very cool. If we were at a restaurant and we were sitting having a cup of coffee, I've had similar conversations with other people, and so again, so I think one of the questions that I would have is, would you expect, or are you expecting kind of a higher level of certainty, a higher level of evidence, or to be more sure than you know, the physical reality or something like that than science could give us? Because there's different interpretations or different understandings of lots of different scientific theories. I mean, heck, we didn't even have a reasonably good idea of what gravity was for, you know, several hundred thousands of years that humans were in existence, and we still, you know, did okay, and we're still not completely sure as a species the nature of gravity, particularly when it gets down to, you know, the quantum level. So gravity, something very essential to us to be able to live, we're not certain. There's still some question marks there. So I guess my question would be like, is it something that you're asking of Christianity because you think there should be more when it comes, or the stakes are higher than there are for, you know, other physical realities? And again, this is not a knock on science. Science is fantastic. I love the scientific method. I love it for investigating the physical reality. I'm just wondering, again, I'm just trying to test the level of skepticism that you're coming to, you know, Christianity with, or saying, I'm expecting X and I'm not getting it, therefore that raises doubts for me, and kind of giving a counterexample and saying, well, are we expecting X in other areas of your life as well?
Yeah. Okay. So I think in science, like, it's discovery, right? It's not purposeful, if that makes sense. Like it is in the sense of a process, but it isn't like, there's nothing saying there's no overarching progression to understand something. Okay. But I guess to put it more bluntly, yes, there's definitely more on the line with Christianity if you're, you know, with the uncertainty, but also that if this came from God versus if the other option would be people, you know, created stories, that the narratives that made sense to them at the time, and, you know, that just keeps perpetuating, then I would hold it to a different standard, because it's given to us for a reason. Like, there's a purpose there.
Sure.
With science, there is no purpose. It's just discovery. And so I wouldn't put those two things together, because one is just like, there may be a limitless power source, you know, right under our nose, and we may never discover it for 2,000 years because there isn't like a overall direction or something given to us, right? But under Christianity, this is given to us. Like, there's revelation, there's scripture, like it's for a purpose, for my relationship, for my soul. And so if there is just such great uncertainty, it seems like it's a continuation of a story because it relies on our intuitions, and it relies on our, you know, gaps in our knowledge and those sorts of things.
Sure. No, and again, I think that's good, and I appreciate that. So let me try to give a little bit of an analogy. This is kind of a serious, yet I think it's relatable to maybe what you do. And I've never been in this experience at all. So hopefully you can, if I'm way off, please tell me. You're standing on the outside of a burning building, and you are unsure if there was somebody inside, but a manager or whatever the building said, I think Susie's still in there, right? Are you going in, or are you saying, well, if you can't give me good evidence that she's in there, I'm staying outside. I'm just out. Like, I'm going to remain skeptical about that. How would you approach a situation like that?
Yeah, well, we'd look at it and be like, okay, well, there's somebody saying that there's potentially somebody in there. There is at the time when that place that this Susie's not accounted for. That place is being rented. There is evidence to be like, it's probable that somebody could be there. But then you also take your own life safety versus what's possible and whatnot. But then again, right there, it's not like that uncertainty is, there's evidence for that uncertainty. Does that make sense?
Sure, but there's still there's evidence for the uncertainty, but you're still at some point making a decision to run into the building or not, right? You're saying this is too dangerous. The roof is already collapsing. If Susie's in there, there is very little chance that she has survived. It's unfortunate. We our hearts go out to Susie's family, but this is not something. So there's still a moment when you put your mask down and you grab your hatchet or whatever and you run back in there, yelling Susie's name, or you say, I'm sorry, that's not something we're going to do. So all I'm doing in this is that you're still have the option to kind of put your life on the line for the option of heading into the building, even though there's a level of uncertainty and you're still kind of weighing some of the different options. But until you actually head in there and check out to make sure that either Susie is in there and you pulled her out, or she's not in there and you guys have the all clear, or you're refraining completely from going in because you've made the decision, there's still some uncertainty there. And I think that to me is part of life. I mean, it's part of being finite. It's part of who we are. And so I'm not coming to, for me, again, this is just for me, and I'm not saying that you ought to do this, but I'm saying I don't come to something like my relationship with Jesus with any more expectation of certainty than standing outside with the building burning, asking, kind of weighing the options and saying, hey, I'm going to head in, or I'm going to refrain, or, this is worth it for me to head in and to make sure that she's there. Now, again, you've made a different decision, and that's fine. All I'm really trying to get across is that there's going to be this level of uncertainty kind of just with life that we have to realize we're not infinite beings. We have to, kind of weigh those options with the information that we have, and we can spend time like you have done looking at the information, but merely there being uncertainty, to me isn't enough to cast doubt on the whole entire thing. And again, for you, it is. So go with me on my thought experiment there for a second, and just weigh in on kind of what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, I think that obviously there is uncertainty in the world, and even being, I don't know if I consider myself a naturalist or what now, but there's huge uncertainty with that, more so, I think. And so the uncertainty part of it really isn't something that's, it's a one of the 1,000 paper cuts, that killed it's not something I really rest a whole lot in. The biblical confusion part is big for me, but it's not the only thing.
Sure.
It's just, I have that, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe this is wrong thinking, but if something under a naturalistic perspective, and the uncertainty is it just is. We just know because we're, like how you said, we're just finite beings, and there's certain things we can know, and we have methods and we have evidence, and we can just go with that. But from a theistic perspective, that uncertainty seems so great. It's almost like the problem, like the gratuitous problem of evil. Like there's so much under it. It seems under a theistic worldview that, like, why the depths of it? You know, like if I was teaching you something, no, that's not a good analogy. Anyways, let's just go with that. It's hard to come up with those on the spot, right?
Right.
Like,
no, it really is.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, again, like I think that there is, like I'll try to use another analogy, because I think the fire analogy, I was trying to relate something that you may have been in that actual situation before, right? And maybe you have, maybe you haven't. But there was a moment for me back in 2006 when I, I proposed to my wife, right? We had been together for several months at that time. And I said, look, there's lots of uncertainty in the future and what we're going to do and where we're going to be. But I know that in this moment, I want to spend the rest of my life with you, and I'm making a commitment to that. And so I'm asking for your hand in marriage. And that was a big step for both of us, right? But we still took that step, even though there was uncertainty with it. But it's a relationship that we've committed to, and we're going on 15 years. So I see a lot of the Christian story similar to that, where you're saying, Jesus, I'm in this, and you are Lord of my life, and I'm going to continue to ask those tough questions of you. Did Adam exist? What theory of atonement is correct? But there is a relationship that I have with this person that is helping me walk through that. So I had a video where I raised those 3 questions initially, and this is why I think they're so important, because if you understand the nature of truth, if you get to the point where you're like, okay, there's a being, a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, personal being out there that exists that seems reasonable based on the evidence, and then Jesus walked out of the grave, you can start to look at some of these other questions kind of in a different way than kind of coming at it from maybe the other side of things. And again, there's uncertainty in our marriage. There's uncertainty in life in general. And I can't say for absolute certain that my relationship with my wife will not dissolve or something won't happen. And that's a terrible thought for me to go down that road. But I think it's one of those things that when I asked her to marry me, that was saying, yeah, the future is uncertain in that sense. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to do it anyway. So to talk to me a little bit about that analogy and how that grabs you.
Yeah. So I think, like, using that analogy, it'd be like, okay, we're going to get into this relationship. And then you find out, well, the story that she told about how she got here, well, it's kind of true, but not really true. It's more of a mytho-historian maybe. That the way she was before, now she's changed, and for particular reasons, there's still other people who still think she's the way she used to be, but other people now think she's the way she is, and you're like, well, why is your history so confusing? Like it make you start questioning, go like, well, are you who you say you are? Because these things in your past that you said you were don't seem to be the case, or are really suspect. And then you go, that's really helpful. Then can I trust who you are now? Or is this just something you've made up? Like, this person who you are now is just something that you wanted to be, but you aren't really are.
No, that is really helpful. And I just finished watching a series on Netflix, and I'll do my best not to give, I don't know.
You can give it away.
Spoiler alert ahead, right? Spoiler alert ahead. If you're watching the series Clickbait, turn it off now and fast forward a few minutes, because there's going to be some spoilers here. But I'll kind of spoil it. But a similar situation happened. There's a guy who gets kidnapped. He has to hold up these signs that says, "I abuse women. I killed a woman," or whatever. And the whole thing is, if this video gets to 5 million views, I die. Right. So that's kind of the premise of the whole show. And it comes you find out that like he was having all these affairs and that he was on these dating sites, and the initial picture of who this guy was starts to really crumble about midway into the season. It's eight episodes, so it really starts to crumble, right? And you can see just the anguish on the sister's face and on the wife's face and on the kids, just how they're interacting. They're really going through that sense of like, oh my goodness, this person that we believed was a certain way, we're now finding out that like, man, and you're in, like, I mean, after like the first episode, my wife and I were like, oh yeah, this is a really good show, we'll keep watching it. So I think that that's what you're getting at, and I won't give away the end, but what you're thinking kind of initially along the whole entire thing, there is the classic twist, and that's all I'll say. And so I think that some of that is real, and I can appreciate what you're saying, where you're like, man, this Jesus that I thought I knew, now there starts to be all these holes in his backstory, kind of what's going on, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's really interesting. That's a good point, and I appreciate that insight. In our few minutes remaining, I'm not going to challenge that. I won't push back on that. I could have lots to say, and we could probably talk for an hour and a half on all these subjects. But I think
probably days.
Probably days, and maybe we'll do it again. So if anyone wants us to continue this conversation in the future, we'll try to put it on the calendar. Leave us a comment and let us know. So tell us a little bit. Kind of wrap this up with maybe like where you're at now. You've hinted at some of the things. Maybe I'm a naturalist. This is where I'm at. My wife is still a Christian. To give us a picture of kind of where you're at now with your worldview in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Basically, I'd say like from whether God exists or not, I think really we can't really know. I think we'd have to stay like intellectually agnostic there. But do I think that there is a God? I'm leaning towards no. And I understand in the video that you just had, like, I mean, there is, there's some big bullets to bite, and that be the case. If that's the case, then that's the case. But basically, I'd like to go to what is the most true. And I know we've had a conversation about what's true and what's not, and that's a whole nother thing too. But yeah, that's deep. But so yeah, and I'd say like right now, I am just kind of gonna leave this journey just where it is right now, and focus on other things. I'm looking into going to grad school, and I've just got my family, and just to like focus on more other things. Yeah. Like, and my wife told me too, like when she said to stop doing it was a realization like, okay, maybe it's time to just put things aside and stop getting so heady into it, and maybe just have experiences and just sit with it for a while and see, without like pursuing more and more and more.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, man, really, Rory, I appreciate the conversation, and I'm so glad that you decided to come on and for us to have this conversation. So, man, just thank you so much. And again, I appreciate the work that you're doing and the conversations that we've had in the past. So that's awesome.
Yeah. And I hugely appreciate your page and your channel. Like I said, it's a great place. Like you're offering a safe space to people who are, these are challenging things. I have some amazing friends, and I don't even want to put this burden on them. Like, I don't really talk to my wife about it, because this is my journey, and I don't want to just bring people into that, because it's a challenging thing. And so I appreciate you being receptive, being very active on there, and I think you're building a good community.
Well, I appreciate that. Well, for those of you that are checking out this video, I hope that you enjoyed the conversation that I had with Rory. Man, I really hope that it encourages you to join our Facebook community. The link for that is in the description to this video. And I am continuing to look forward to other conversations that I can have with just people that are on this same journey, whether you fully deconstructed like Rory did, or you're in the process and you just have some questions. Feel free to leave a comment or join the Facebook group. And I mention that every once in a while on the Facebook group. So if you're interested in having a conversation similar to the way that we did today, please let me know. I'd love to have you on. And with that, we will meet you again next time as we deal with deconstruction.